Okay. We might kick off. So welcome, everybody. Thanks for braving the traffic. I know it's really bad out there, so we might have some latecomers who are making it around the bus strike. But welcome to our event tonight. Just by way of introduction, this is kind of a different event for us. We have a show coming up in February called Humans Need Not Apply. You might be aware of this, or this might be kind of new to you, which is on automation and artificial intelligence. And we just closed our open call for proposals, which means our curatorial panel is convening at this time and looking through myriad and very diverse suggestions for artworks, installations, workshops, events on this topic. And we thought it was a really interesting opportunity to kind of open up the forum and take an opportunity for you to hear a little bit from the curators as they're in this process, but also to suggest ideas, to discuss topics and themes that we're going to cover in the show. So Humans Need Not Apply is about automation and AI at its core, and that's really interesting, and we're at this moment, and it's very topical. And actually the suggestion for the show came from William, and one reason I think we found it very compelling here at Science Gallery was you have automation and AI as a topic, but at this moment it feels like there's this increasingly interesting foray into creativity and even art and culture, potentially, these things that were previously really the realm of only humans, that maybe robots and algorithms are encroaching on things that only we could do. And on the other side of AI and automation, you have this slightly worrying, what if the robots put us out of business or make us all redundant or take all our jobs? I should be smiling because it's kind of, it's quite a worrying prospect. On the other hand, it's not the first time this has been suggested, so I guess one thing we want to question with this show is, are we at a unique time in the development of automation and AI? So I might introduce our curators, and then we'll go into discussion. Well, actually, rather, I'll ask our curators to introduce themselves and tell you a little bit about what they do. So we'll just, myself, I'm Ian Brunswick. I'm the program manager here at Science Gallery. I'm not actually on the curatorial panel, so I'm more facilitating. So if anything doesn't get in the show, don't blame me. Just joking. But William, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure, thanks, Ian. So if you're mad about something not in the show, you can blame me and the rest of us. I'm a freelance curator, as Ian mentioned, and writer of books about art and design that in some way or another pulls in new scientific research. Hence the interest in how advances in technology like AI are being sort of interpreted or reacted to by artists and designers now. And there seems to be a great upswell in that sort of work, and that was just one of the sort of triggers that led to this show, I'd say.
Amber Case?
Hello, my name is Amber Case. I am on the way moving from Portland, Oregon in the United States to Cambridge, Massachusetts. I am going to join Harvard Berkman Klein Center out of Harvard Law School for Internet and Society and study the ways that technology is impacting humans, a lot of the security and privacy and weird traps that people can get into when automation happens. I just finished writing a book called Calm Technology, which is the idea that technology should get out of the way, let us live our life, that it should amplify our humanness instead of put us on pause and make us repeat things into a phone again and again, especially if we don't have the San Francisco accent that everybody's been programming in terms of our voice recognition technology. So I've been on a book tour talking about that. The field of study that I study is called Cyborg Anthropology. It's the interaction between humans and technology and how technology affects culture. So I'm really interested in what is badly termed AI, virtual reality, augmented reality, all of the different ways that we can interact with computers. Usually I just study what people have done in the 1960s and 70s because a lot of this has already been done, written about, and experimented with, and I try to bring that forward into an era that we can apply today instead of wasting the research time and money and traps that people can get stuck in.
Thanks, Amber. And our third curator is Damien Henry.
Hello. So my name is Damien Henry. I'm an acoustical engineer. I've been working in two startups. The first one was focused on the sound analysis. Our goal was to make a musical instrument where you sing in it and you play notes. And at the end, we just do karaoke games. And the second startup was named Audio Gaming, and we do sound synthesis for movies, like wind noise or step noise or engine noise. And at some point, I was trying to figure out if virtual reality was a good candidate for this kind of sound. So I investigated a little bit virtual reality, and I ended up to create the cardboard with David Coase in the lab of the Cultural Institute in Paris. And that's how my life at Google. I'm a Google engineer now. And I'm still working on virtual reality, but also I have a small team of creative coders and artists, and we try to find new experiment, new experience when we mix art and virtual reality and machine learning.
Thanks, Damien. I guess I might kick off because perhaps we're at a time or in kind of an AI algorithm automation bubble or zeitgeist at the moment. And I would ask, do you think we're in a bubble, or is this the beginning of something different? Who would like to field that?
I'll start
Okay.
and say that your question makes me think of the quote that's written on the wall down at the here on the ground floor from David Wong. I'll believe it when I see it. That I'm pretty skeptical that things are going to change dramatically so fast. Although, I mean, we will see some changes, but I think the media hypes this just like it has in the past, and it will again. Maybe next year, fusion power will be right around the corner again.
So you don't think this is the next industrial revolution, so to speak?
It very well may be, but it's more. I think it's slower moving than most people predict.
I like the book Future Shock and then the sequel Present Shock, that the present is happening so fast now instead of the future that we can't really keep up with it, that we have our own metabolism rate as a species and we can't digest the new technology all at once. We have to wait, not a semester, but like a year or another year. For instance, when cell phones with cameras first came out, instead of just a cell phone, people panicked. They thought it was the end of privacy and everything was going downhill. They started banning them everywhere in locker rooms and dressing rooms. And then we learned a new cultural way to, you take your phone out of your pocket and you go like this, you're going to take a picture. And if somebody's in it, then they can either duck out of the way or realize that you're just taking a picture of your food as a pre-digestive ritual in order to make it taste better. But in reality, I don't think that when these things happen, when these big changes happen, they usually happen in a way that is just part of your reality so much that you don't even notice. I mean, how many of you wake up next to your phone in the morning and read something on it or check your email? I mean, these things would be unfathomable just 10 years ago unless you were really heavily into business and using your BlackBerry all the time. But these are things that kind of gradually become a part of us. And in terms of the whole AI revolution thing, in the 60s it was a really big deal, and we had Eliza, the chatbot, the psychologist, the psychiatrist, and we had the 80s big AI revolution, and and then it kind of went down, and then we have today, it's AI again. But in reality, we have tons of automation going on behind the scenes. It's just that automation is invisible. Right now, we have tons of invisible technology going around. It's electricity. It flows through the veins of this building. The building itself, through the HVAC systems, is breathing. We don't notice that. That's just mundane and boring. It's mundane technology. We don't go to conferences about washing machines and how exciting they are because we have a washing machine in our house. A lot of us could say, oh, I'm a Luddite, I don't use technology, but you have a blow dryer and a lawnmower and all these different things in your house. And even every time you use Google search, it's a lot of little bots, little robots out there that are going through and crawling through search results and feeding that to you. It's just, and your cars are built by automated machines. There's tons of automation, like supply chains are often automated.
That makes me think of the quote that, when AI works, you stop calling it AI and you just call it technology.
Bingo, yeah.
So if it actually works, we just get used to it. But you mentioned the phone on the side of the bed and how progress can happen very quickly and we get used to it. But on the other hand, the phone on the side of the bed, we're being told, is a very bad thing for us, and checking your email first thing in the morning rather than like waking up and being mindful. So are we getting used to things which are actually bad,
Well, are we getting used to turning on the lights in the morning instead of waking up at dawn and going to sleep when the sun sets? I mean, we use electricity all the time too. I mean, I think it's more about every time you do too much of a thing, it becomes bad. And right now, it's so easy with the touch of a button. I kind of think of it's like a womb where you don't have to go anywhere. You can just get everything delivered to you from a button. We kind of get, it's not lazy, but we get used to this instant gratification. And we've evolved with stomachs that tell us when we're too full, and we feel bloated, and we feel horrible, but we don't do that with phones. We end up hoarding pictures of cats and news just like a hoarder would, but you can't really see it, and it doesn't take up any physical weight, and so you just stuff it in.
So we might get totally bloated with ubiquitous AI in our life, perhaps.
Yeah, I mean, there's all those article engines that tell you what to read at the end of the article that you've read, and you click on them compulsively because they've been growing. I mean, we don't have the term as much anymore, cybernetics, but it's this feedback loop that says, and cybernetics is not really a great term either, but this feedback loop that says, oh, this person clicked on this, let's serve up this article now. And so we get caught in these feedback loops already that are part computer generated, but it's us in the loop voting for it that give us more and more of this sticky material, and it works because there's ads.
It sounds kind of like we're getting what we asked for. I'd ask Damien, are you, taking that in mind, are you optimistic or pessimistic given the state of AI?
No, I'm completely optimistic for sure.
Yeah.
But I also think that, as you said, it's a slow and growing process. I don't see something completely different in the next coming years. All the research that make AI exciting these days, for instance, AlphaGo that wins the world champion of Go, something that is a little bit unexpected. So that raises more attention. In fact, most of this research has been done maybe 20 or 30 years ago. But now we have computers that have more power. We have more data thanks to internet. And also, and I think that's the most important part, there is a community of research has grown a lot. So there is more researchers to make progress on it. And I'm especially optimistic and excited because now there is very good materials on the web. So if you know how to code, you can create a chatbot, you can do a lot of stuff. And I'm very excited to see what the creative community will do using all this new field.
It's interesting you say you're optimistic because you think maybe the rate of change is maybe a bit overblown, or that it's not whiplash kind of speed. Some of the people who seem most pessimistic in the media are the ones who do think that we're approaching kind of singularity level of technology, that AI will have runaway AI. So the people, oddly, who are most optimistic about the technology's capability are the most pessimistic about its ramifications. What do you think about those sort of doomers?
I think...
Is Skynet coming to get us?
Yeah, I think most of the fear came of a science fiction movie. If you look at the application of AI today, it's things that are not that disruptive. Like you said, selecting the next article that you will read or the next song that you will hear is not something that makes a huge difference for now. But I completely agree that there is a huge potential. For instance, the self-driving car is a potential to save the life of a lot of people. So potentially there is a huge benefit, but it takes time.
What do you guys think? I mean, you have people like Elon Musk and Stephen Hawking saying this is a great threat to humanity. We should be much more concerned about regulation of runaway AI.
I think that a lot of that is an ego trip. So if you're involved, if you're a technologist and you believe that, well, it's very self-serving in a way because it implies that what you do has such far-reaching consequences. I agree with what Damien mentioned, however. I think that a kind of adoption of this that should, and I really hope comes quickly, is with self-driving cars. I was just looking up the numbers before the talk, and 1.2 million people every year around the world are killed in road accidents in cars. That's like every 4 years, that's like the population of Ireland dying. Another 3 times as many people are maimed or hurt, like crippled for life from road accidents. So that just as one sort of area of adoption, and I don't think it's going to happen fast even though I want it to, can have really far-reaching impact and a very positive effect. Whereas I think the predictions about mass loss of employment, I think this will happen as self-driving cars, of course, are adopted. But across many industries, I think the pace will be slower than is predicted. And you can look back to history, as I think Amber kind of implied just a minute ago, that predictions of this have been going on for a long time. As early as 1821, the economist David Ricardo in England talked about how humans were going to become redundant because of this newfangled machine technology. And yet, it created that machinery eventually created higher wages and many more millions of jobs for people.
This is the automation doesn't create less work, it just changes the definition of, or what we call work, or the style of work.
Sure.
Kind of. But what about, if it happens a little bit quicker than is being anticipated, and there are a lot of consulting firms, for example, who are, assessing how threatened by AI and automation is this career or that career, how secure are these certain careers. If it happens a little bit faster, it only has to happen quicker than people can reskill, or that society can adapt. So, do you have any worry about, mass redundancy or, entire industries being upset by AI at all?
I do. I think that the march of technology has shown that what it does is tends to exacerbate problems in the social relationships. So, as automation concentrates wealth among very few companies or very few people, that has these other effects that indeed are negative. But that's because I think that's the fault of the social relationships and not the fault of the technology. It's how we're using it. So I do think there are industries that are threatened, but I think it's a matter of addressing it in social ways, and those ways are possible even though they're difficult. Like, for example, being able to retool faster by way of more heavy investment in community colleges in many countries, which really is overdue, really must happen.
Amber, can I ask you, just since we're kind of talking about lots of things that we're presuming will be automated,
Sure.
Is there anything you think should not be automated? Since you were talking about slow tech earlier.
Yeah. We were talking about this a little bit earlier. You could potentially automate a surgeon by figuring out algorithms and okay, here's a site of operation. We've collected how a doctor removes this kind of tumor 2,000 times, and now we can have a remote, long-distance teleoperative robot go in and go, observed by a surgeon. Or we can there's a startup called 3Scan, which is the first company to do 3D biopsy scanning. And so the guy's name is Todd Huffman, and 4 years ago he said, I'm going to make a robot. The big issue was right now it takes 2 years to train to take a two-dimensional biopsy sample, prepare it to get scanned. And the people that learn that trade run out of eyesight and their hands tense up and become really bad after about 10 years. So they get these very short careers, and it's miserable work. So what this machine does is it takes a biopsy sample and with a diamond knife and a light shining through it, slices it up, and then scans each slice as it's cutting, and then stores it in three-dimensional space. Now, the computer power and storage wasn't there when they first started this project, but what they're able to do is learn and get this pattern recognition about whether there's a tumor or the beginning of a tumor, and they can start to see these trends over time. And once they see enough trends, they can proactively prevent certain diseases from happening or do proactive chemotherapy and things like that. So you can start saying, okay, now these people, instead of spending 2 years to skill up in this space and then only a 10-year career, they can learn and work on different things. Like, for instance, the projects that we can learn more from after doing the Human Genome Project, now that we have the genome all set in terms of kind of understanding what does what, we can then generate either by machine or by simulation all of the projects that we want to do, and try and see which experiments will result in cures.
And cancer screening is a great example because the data set is so huge. If you've seen every screening over the world, which a human can't do, then you have a much better data set to compare these small things. So that's really good for automation in health.
Yeah, it's really important to know that the biggest difference I see between humans and machines is that humans are incredibly good curators because they're embodied. They're in a physical body. They understand the context. They understand all the different variables. And the reason why Google doesn't give you one result and instead gives you 10 that might be relevant to you is because you, as a human at the end, are the best at choosing what's relevant to you. But what humans aren't as good at is seeing a pattern over time. So they're not, as we live on, our path in real time, we don't necessarily see that over time, we keep a bunch of stuff in the corner and that impedes our ability to get through our house and that makes us angry in some way. I used to do simulations using the Sims video game where you simulate all these people. And I would make my floor plan and then run it in 3x speed. And I would notice certain things that I would do in my regular life that weren't very productive. And I would run the sim and change furniture around and see what would happen until I was optimized in this virtual world and this kind of feedback loop, and then come back and notice that I was happier over time and I got more work done over time and I didn't leave the bills on the table all the time. I took care of them. And it sounds really simplistic and silly and even downright mechanical, but it was a kind of funny thing to see just how much I was missing living in real time, that I could curate fine, but that pattern over time is hard to see. And what technology can do often is make what's formerly invisible visible, like the sleep cycle app for the phone. It kind of records your sleep and shows you what cycle you're in, and you can set an alarm to wake you up before a certain time, like before 7 a.m., in the right sleep cycle, so you don't wake up groggy. So this is something where the computer's doing something that's useful, and you're just sitting there resting, and then it wakes you up at the right time.
Yeah, we also talked about mental health bots, and there's some chat bots online which are kind of based on CBT to give people basically a CBT-like or cognitive behavioral therapy-like experience, and essentially counsel people online. And we were discussing that kind of role of automation. How do you guys feel about that very human encounter being automated, or are there anything else that you think shouldn't be automated?
Well, I think it's going to be really difficult to automate a lot of those things in the first place when it comes to mental health evaluation and treatment. This is largely because the way that the brain works and the way that we develop mental health problems is still just being understood. And the dimensions of the problem of how many people suffer from some form of mental illness are so vast that I think that's something that's a job anyway that's very safe from automation in the decades to come.
I was actually surprised in the open call. Actually, there were a good amount of pieces which dealt with very human emotion kind of topics. I would ask you guys on, we shouldn't mention pieces that are under consideration in particular, but was there anything that particularly surprised you about the open call that we were reviewing over the past couple of days? Without
saying what we saw, it's a little bit difficult. But there was
I guess any trends that you noticed that you thought were interesting or surprising?
I was a little surprised that the state of the art was not at a higher level. I think before I actually looked at the proposals, I had been doing a lot of reading of books about AI and coverage in the media, and it led me to have these higher expectations of how convincing or interactive AI can be.
Yeah, I'm used to, I guess I thought that more people would submit things. A lot of people were saying, okay, here's a submission, and it's an AI that does this, but we're going to build the AI ourselves. Instead of saying, no, the story of AI starts with Eliza chatbot, or, these little smart bots or whatever, chatbots, and then we're going to build a bot based on the latest open source bot, or what we've learned from 10 years of researching this, now we're going to make this bot, or we're just going to fork some open source bot and make something that's interesting and reasonable. A lot of people are saying, well, we'll just create our own, without looking at the fact that there's a lot already out there that you can kind of modify just a little bit. And there wasn't anyone who suggested a bot that would also work with humans. as an input. One of the things I wanted to do, which I've not been able to do yet, is a lot of times, like press will ask me the same questions. So what I want to do is say, do a chat, and whatever question comes up, there's a database of responses. And if they ask a question that there isn't a response for in the chat bot, it will send me a text, and then I will be able to, from anywhere in the world, text back a clever answer. It will be sent to them, and then it will be added to the database. And that way, you're kind of digitally storing yourself, and let's say you were to die at some point, you get this interactive chatbot at the end of your life that has 40,000 new entries of stuff that people are actually interested in, and you can answer some questions, right? Where it's not, a lot of people think, okay, well, I'm going to have a chatbot and it's going to do all these things, but they don't talk about the other part that, like, humans are going to ask a question and another human probably knows the answer. Why not send that to the human and add that to the database so that it grows over time? And I think that's, it's again that it's always this all or nothing. It's like, it's humans or machines. Like, it's never been humans or machines. We've co-evolved with technology over time, from the first tools, from writing on walls in caves, from extending our brains onto a substance, writing books, storing our identity outside of ourselves and distributing that so that when we die, other people can download our brains through a zip file that on archives when you flip open the pages and have a virtual reality experience. Like, brains can fill in so much more, and I think we don't give them enough credit. Like, you can have the least amount of technology and connect it to people. Like, Google does this really well. It just connects you to what other people have made online instead of assuming that you want a certain thing or trying to automate everything for you. So there's a lot to be done in amplifying the best of each. When you try to make something that's so, technologically advanced, it ends up putting people on pause. Like, who's been stuck in a parking lot when you're trying to get your car out because the automated ticketing machine is down and you can't get out because there's spikes and you can't get over them, and you've had to call somebody but there's no phone number because they thought they automated the entire machine. I mean, there's tons of places where we can automate everything and then we can be stuck in that trap. And I think a lot of it has to do with social class. If you're in a place where there's too many people and everything's automated, you can get caught in these dystopian scenarios where there's no person.
That's actually my next question. Do you guys have any favorite AI fails that you've seen or encountered ever? Or does the audience have any favorite AI fails? There have been a good few on social media, actually, over the past few months.
I'll give you a really quick one. There was an artist that I wanted to reach out to who works on AI.
Turned out they were a bot.
It turned out that they have a contact page, and on the contact page there's a CAPTCHA to prove you're not a robot, and it wouldn't work. Like, I entered the right word 4 times, and it's like the AI is keeping me from contacting them.
Did you start to question yourself? You're like, how can I not figure this out?
Yeah, you're silent.
A burp in the Matrix.
There's a podcast, I forgot which one it was, but it talked about the Silicon Valley startup guy, and he wanted to automate the ticketing system. He said, your mobile phone should be able to get you into the subway station, and you can go in and you've just download an app, and we'll just replace all the attendants at the train station, right? So the journalist says, well, can we go down to the train station and can you talk to the station attendant and say, hi, I would like to automate you, right? And he said, oh, sure. And then they also asked, have you ever taken the subway before? And he said, no. So he goes downstairs and he walks right up to this woman, and this woman's about 45 years old, African American. She's like the coolest person ever, full of person, and she's awesome, right? And he walks right up and is like, all right, I'm gonna automate you because the future, you don't have to sit here anymore and hate your job. And she sits there and she's like, what? Excuse me, and then right on cue, these 2 people come over and they're tourists and they're from Japan, and they're sitting there and they're like, we don't have cell phone access here. We don't have wireless here. Our credit card isn't working in the machine. How do we get from this place to this place? And even if they had an app, what if their phones were out of batteries? What if they couldn't download the app? There are some phones, like some Android phones, that just won't download an app no matter what you do. So she said, okay, here's a paper map, and you go from here to here, and I'll just manually give you some tickets. You've got a bit of money on you. This is great. And they're like, thank you, so excited. And she was like, you're welcome. And then they left. And then the woman's like, so do you still want to automate me? Like, you know, here's a situation in which, like, would you like to go to another country, not understand the language, and have your phone run out of batteries and not have an app? Because there's not going to be an app that works in every single country. Like, can you imagine, like, the UN's, like, mandated app, everybody needs to have this app? You know, no. It's going to be lots of different apps in lots of different countries, and even though we have credit cards now, people still use cash, and people still use checks. And you bet with the next technology, not everybody's going to be able to use it. And she's like, plus, I like my job, I get paid a lot of money, I get to go home and garden, and this is my best job ever, and I can sit here and draw and write, and I wouldn't trade this for the world. And he was like, oh, like, you know, it was this really important moment that the listeners learned, and he probably forgot about it within 2 minutes because he went back to his world. But it's a
basic client interview for a design sort of thinking process. They do not want this.
Exactly. It's this idea that once you automate something, it will work perfectly because that's what we see in films. We don't see that in films it takes 50 takes to get something right. And we don't see the person yelling at Siri in the car saying, go home, go home. What, you want a taco? You want a burrito? No, go home. Home is, you know, we don't have any entries for home, you know, and you're fumbling around. Like, these are things that that we don't see because we have enough edits and enough editing for everything. You know, another example, which I'm probably talking too much, but another example is this guy. There's always these ads where it's like this perfect-looking guy wakes up in his perfect condo in San Francisco and with the perfect American accent, you know, talks to his machine. The machine understands him the first try because he has clear enunciating skills. He probably went through some special speech therapy that costs way more than anybody's tuition. And then, you know, he wakes up and the computer's like, hello, Dave, how are you? Here's the weather. Here's your appointments for today. And you have a date at 6 p.m. There's always a date at the end, right? But for the most of the day, he's completely alone, right? And so I say to people, does that sound cool? You know, and he's walking down the street, he's speaking to his phone hears him. And I'm like, let me give you a real day. Guy gets really drunk, wakes up next to somebody he doesn't know, and she's sitting there or he's sitting there, and the computer says, hello, Dave, you have appointment for your psoriasis and your foot fungus, like, welcome, you know, and like, and then it shows him all this personal data and her, and then the music starts blasting, and then he tries to turn it off, but he's still drunk, and he slurs instead of has the perfect American accent, and then the music won't turn off because he can't yell loudly enough because he needs to drink water. Later, she storms off because she realizes she's late to an appointment because her phone is out of batteries and she didn't have a charger because he has a different proprietary charger than he does, and so she didn't bring it over because she got too drunk and she misplaced it at the bar, and therefore she doesn't know what time it is. She has to get out somewhere. She has an automated card for the transit and she can't get to it because she lost her pass because it's on her phone and her phone's out of battery, so she can't get anywhere. So she has to hail a cab, but she realizes her phone's out of battery, so she can't use an Uber. Meanwhile, he's trying to get to his appointments. There's no date at the end of the day, and he's got an issue where he's trying to run down the street and talk to his phone, but his phone doesn't understand him because there's all these trucks driving by all the time.
That's probably not an ad that's going to get made.
Right. That's the problem. We see all these ads where everything works perfectly, but in reality, it's like Zach Denfield and his friend were talking about. It's a mild dystopia. We live between these moments of utopia, and then we have to go through all these things that are annoying. Like, oh, I forgot my confirmation code for my ticket, and I don't have the ticket number. Where did I go? Oh, it's stuck in an email. It didn't get automatically sunk over to my calendar because that import script failed.
Another ad that I love is, if anybody's seen the Tesla self-driving kind of ad where it's the same kind of thing. Somebody wakes up in a beautiful, like, 2-story California apartment, and I think there's a mention of a date he has that evening, and he says, you know, car, pull yourself out of the driveway, and I'm going to get going in 5 minutes. And the car takes itself out of the garage and then drives him along the highway most of the time, you know, driving itself. And it looks really slick and utopian and aspirational and upper class. But it's not probably that accurate to anybody's experience is going to be of this. But it is a promise that is actually kind of happening right now. I mean, maybe this whole illusory perfect lifestyle isn't, but, you know, Tesla cars and Google car at the moment are making massive leaps and bounds. Like, the self-driving car is pretty amazing right now. Damien.
No, what I'm saying is that it's the same for the shampoo advertisement too. I mean, an advertisement, I guess for the air and for everything is the same. So it's not completely related to technology. That's the dream that we see on TV. Of course, yeah, the world that we live in is not as perfect, and
yet, I would say
technology is a big part of it today. Yeah.
And yet, I would argue that in a lot of ways we are living in this really great dream. Comparatively, if you look at the data about like how well we live, how long we live, just imagine for a second trying to explain to someone in the year 1901 what life was like in 2016, just from the perspective of employment, that almost none of us are working in, hauling water, operating telegraphs, like the kind of jobs that we have, the activities that we do, like a cybersecurity expert or someone who designs banner ads or a video game designer, like you couldn't even, it would be so hard to convince this person that these jobs exist, and thousands of people have them. And yet you'd be talking to someone who didn't have access to penicillin, electrification and the telegraph. These are all new technologies. The railroads were just taking off. So, I mean, there's a lot. In some way, okay, so one of the discussions that we had early on about this exhibition in automation was to try to get into this question: can people move into like a poetry and art-based economy? Like, what happens when automation really does take everything that we think of now as jobs? And I think that someone from the year 1900 would say, guys, you're already living in a poetry-based economy. Half of you people, what you do is you create different flavors of bullshit and you trade it. And in a way, from that perspective, I think he's correct. And so it will be, I think, in 50 years, when there are all these jobs that we can't imagine today, but we'll be doing them, or our kids or our kids' kids will be doing them.
It raises a good question also of, in 50 years' time, will things like universal basic wage, which is really getting discussed about now, kind of in parallel to this bloom in automation, and being reasonably considered in countries. In Switzerland, they just had a vote on. I don't think they went for it in the end. But is this potentially inevitable, or is this a good idea? I don't know what you guys think about universal basic income as a concept.
Well, we'll have 1 million more people to deal with per year if we have self-driving cars, because they won't die. So that'll be good.
And we won't have people employed, or as many people employed to drive cars. But I mean,
Yeah.
one thing that came up with this when we discussed universal basic income before is it's not the first time this has ever been considered. And when there were previously, big shifts in economy, that could have been undertaken. And what would have happened in, Damien, I think you said in 1880 if we'd done that.
Yeah, I grew up in a very small village in the country. So I'm glad I'm not born 100 years ago and be a farmer, because it was a very difficult life. So yes, if we, as you said, it was very difficult at 80 years ago when all the mechanical came to the country, and most of the job has disappeared. If you compare the number of people who work in a farm today compared to 100 years ago, so it's a completely shift of work, and I'm glad that there is no universal income that has been done at this point, because if it was the case, it means that we wouldn't have do what we are doing today. So there wouldn't be a game designer, there wouldn't be a designer. Maybe it's a bullshit poetry, as you said, but I like this world, so I'm happy we did it.
Okay. I'll open up to questions in the audience in just a second, but I'll finish with like a kind of an impossible question. But one thing that came up in the open call frequently was robots or algorithms creating art, essentially, and creating culture. And when you walked in, the last piece of music, that piano music, is algorithmically created music. So it sounds decent, I think. I've heard worse. But it wasn't created by a human exactly. And so we've seen pieces that look pretty legit or have at least aesthetic quality. Do you guys personally consider that robots and algorithms can create art?
I stand by I guess I consider myself a creativity conservative. And I think that to label something art, it has to be generated by a being that can reflect on the human experience. So since a computer, at least as far as we know yet, can't do that. I think it's still the exclusive purview of humans to create art.
Yeah, I have a slightly different version of that where a human creates a program, a human creates an algorithm, a human creates that as a tool. For instance, humans made Photoshop, and then if we use Photoshop to make a reflective piece or a prank or whatever we're doing to get people to stop and pause and think in a gallery, then it's the human using the technology as a tool to create that art, and the human's the one doing the reflecting. In the case of a human making an algorithm, and the algorithm generates something unexpected, it's like an artist doing an experiment, but they're still reflecting and still generating that thing. Like we always think of technology as outside of ourselves, but all technology has been created by people. All web pages have been created by humans, or at least by a person who has hand coded something. And I think of like some code could be considered art because it's or craft. Well, that's a whole another argument. But where you're hand building something tediously and debugging it, and it's incredibly labor intensive. And so if something gets generated out of that looks like art, it's still made by a human. And if the human is also an artist and has produced work, then it could be considered art. But I would tie it to the people who have written the code, and not to the computer itself.
Damien, what do you think?
I fully agree. I think all of this is tools. So yeah, if we are looking for an artist, I think we should look to who has the intent to do something. And obviously the computer, the algorithm, is just doing what it has been programmed for. And even when we talk about machine learning, or I would say machine learning instead of artificial intelligence, because artificial intelligence is something that is, there is no real good definition for that. But if you think about machine learning, you ask the computer to take a big data set and to try to find pattern out of that. So if you give new data that it has not seen before, he can decide to categorize if it's a cat or a dog, for instance, if it's a classifier for pictures. But the intent is a human that decided to train this algorithm based on picture of cat and dog. So it's the same for generative art. At the beginning, if there is no human to take the decision to say, oh, I want to make a piece of art using artificial intelligence, then there is no piece at the end.
I think that's a perfect segue, actually, just before we go to questions, to just show a couple quick examples of this. And we made this into a little bit of game, and I'm going to ask you guys to guess on a couple pieces whether, if you've seen this before, don't cheat, which is the bot created and which is the human created art. So this is, well, these are two paintings. One is by Rembrandt, and one is by a deep neural network, a whole team of designers and an artificial intelligence who has studied all Rembrandt's works to create another Rembrandt. It was, I think, only really exhibited for the first time this year. And it's, I won't tell you which one it is, but have a look at them. You won't get to study them for long. But one of them is really Rembrandt and one of them isn't. So who thinks the one, well, let's ask which one is bot created. Who thinks the one on the left is created by the AI? Okay, about a little over half, looks like. And how many think the one on the right is created by the AI? Okay, about half. And who didn't answer and is just two stumps? Okay, decisive crowd. Okay, so the one on the left is the AI created one, and the one on the right is a real Rembrandt. So you can look up, it's called The Next Rembrandt, isn't it? Or the new Rembrandt?
The project.
The Next Rembrandt, it's a project. So it's quite striking and quite impressive. And if you look online, they have layers even to the painting. So it's not just a 2D kind of recreation. Okay, continuing on with our new game called Bot or Not. This is a beautiful poem, and we have a volunteer who's going to read the poem to us. This is Zach Denfeld from Science Gallery.
I don't know how I got picked for this, but in times of the most extreme unction, my name is very thin, almost zipper-like. Space is very thin also, and distance is that way too. But also, the stars become very accordion-like. So we eat them.
So hands for the bot. If you think it's a bot, hands up. Okay, hands down. And if you think it's a human, hands up. Okay, that one is a human. Next one, which is Zach really loves reading poetry, and he volunteered to read this one as well.
I did slam poetry in high school.
Oh my goodness, okay.
And for the sands, a face, some more really, smiles down, and the banglers would go to the hours from the smoke.
Bot,
Okay, but
okay. And human, it's by bot.
Oh.
And last one, okay. Last time we'll hear from Zach do poetry tonight.
I'll give him a break. A hot and torrid bloom which fans wise flames and begs to be redeemed by forces black and strong will now oppose my naked will and force me into regions of despair.
That sounded the best. I mean, Zach, you were good, but Katrina, that sounded really good. So, bot and human. It's a bot. So it's a pretty good bot, in fairness.
Great bot. Yeah.
So hard to tell. And our last one is for painting, which again, this is hard to tell. Gosh, I'm having trouble remembering which one's the bot on this one, actually. If you think the one on the left is the bot, raise your hand. Okay, and if you think the one on the right is a bot, raise your hand. More on the right. I can't remember which one it is. Which one? It's the one on the right. Okay, that was very good. So paintings are easier. And one last painting. Have a look at it. Take your time. Okay, who thinks the bot is the one on the left? Okay, hands down. And bot on the right. Slightly more for the right one, I think. Which one is it? It's one on the left, is the bot. Okay. So hard to tell with the paintings. Those are all the bot or not games. I mean, but it seemed pretty popular, so maybe we'll do bot or not another time at our table quiz. Does anybody have any questions for the panelists that have come up so far, or things they want to share, I guess, on this theme? Yeah.
I just have one question because we never went to the end on things you wouldn't automate. You know, the question you had, what would you not?
Oh, yeah.
So for
thank you. I don't know how to answer. The way I see it is that it's potentially a lot of new tools that we can create. And for instance, if you take the computer and the spreadsheet, I'm not sure that it's really, it automates a task. It's not automated job. I think it makes it can make individuals more efficient in their job. And it automates one part of the job that is the most repetitive one. So I think the way I see it is that it's potentially really powerful tools that can make all of us more, it can empower all of us by making accessible things that are more complex. Like, for instance, a spreadsheet, you can do extremely complex calculation, even if you are not an expert in, I don't know, I know if I want to estimate how much my next house will cost. Let's say I want to buy a house. You need to be a specialist to calculate with credit and all stuff like that. With a spreadsheet, you can just make the calculation, even if you don't understand how it works. It still empower you and give you more power to do things. And I really believe that machine learning, I think I prefer to use machine learning instead of artificial intelligence, because it's difficult to define what intelligence is. And in the past, we used to define intelligence by something that a machine can't do. For instance, chess, it's very intelligent. And then a computer beats chess world champion, so chess is no more intelligent. And Go is still a game that you need to be really intelligent to master it. Now Go, no more, you need to be intelligent. So artificial intelligence, it's a little bit hard to define, and it's difficult to talk about it in details. If you consider machine learning as a tool, it's something that is able to detect some pattern in a big amount of data and to help you to understand this pattern. To when you have new data that you have no idea about, then it will help you to understand this new data. So I'm not sure it answers your question, but yeah.
What would you not automate?
Pardon?
What would you not automate?
Well, I worked as a public librarian for 20 plus years, which I'm actually doing a course that involves machine learning at the moment, with data analytics at the moment. But the one thing that struck me, not so much about, well, I wouldn't automate the vote, obviously, but the one thing that struck me was that when you were saying about the phone size being bad for you, there was a time, like probably within certainly up until the 1930s, where if you were in a public library, you were not allowed to borrow. You had to have like 2 fiction books or 2 non-fiction books to every fiction book you borrowed, because fiction books were seen as bad for you, and so you had to kind of balance that with something worthwhile. So what's bad for you changes over time, and now people are lamenting the end of those things. So, but yes, I still think there'll always be, as long as there's trees, of course, paper books.
Okay. Yeah, another one back there.
I'm Damien Jackson. I'm on the Ethics and Privacy Working Group of the Adapt Centre here. I'm just wondering what you think about the ethics of what's happening in machine learning today. It is, you can regard it as a tool, and tools have always changed the way humanity exists, and they can change it for the better or for the worse. When you talk about we, you use the word we a lot. I imagine that the we you have in your imagination is not a typical human being on the face of the planet Earth. So is machine learning likely to improve the lives of humankind as a whole, or is it going to improve the lives of middle-class white people?
That's a good question. I mean, and in that regard, is machine learning different than many emerging technologies as well? And does it have potential pitfalls that others didn't as well? There's a lawsuit in the States about job profiling at the moment, or a class action lawsuit for these algorithms that are used to profile people for suitability for jobs, and that's being questioned in the courts.
Yeah,
Yep.
Maybe I can answer the first part of the question about ethics and stuff like that. So for sure, it's a tool that can manipulate a lot of data, and data can be related to humans, so that it raises the problem of privacy. And there is a lot of people doing research about bias, for instance. So contain a lot of bias, then your system will predict things that has also a lot of bias. So if you want to predict if you need to control someone for his tax, for instance, you can't control everybody, so you have to find a way to select people that you want to go in detail to check this tax of this person. Then obviously you want an algorithm that will help you to find the right person. So then potentially there is a risk for discrimination, that the algorithm always tell you to see this category of person, and this is maybe not good. So there is a complete field of research about trying to analyze if there is some bias in this kind of algorithm and how we can remove them. But it's not easy, of course.
Mm-hmm. I think it's a really good point that you brought up, especially about class. I think about class and how technology affects class all the time. So for instance, if you had one of those GPS trackers in your car so that you could get a better insurance premium, those will affect you poorly if you live in an area of town that has more crime, because that's on the demographic list. Or if you drive from 1 a.m. to 6 a.m. because you have a night shift, it's going to increase your premium because you're driving during the dangerous time of night in which people could be drunk on the road. And it doesn't take into account that maybe you are trying really hard and doing a really good job and you're very responsible, but the area that you live in might be turning against you and thus making things much more expensive. So I think that there's kind of that argument where if you are a higher class status and can afford things, you get better interfaces. right? So you can afford to evolve externally by purchasing these objects, the new one, the latest one, whereas everybody else either gets hand-me-down technologies or has to, sit there with like the iPhone 3, which can no longer run the software that people normally use. When I first did cell phone research, I deliberately kept an older device that wasn't a smartphone to see how I might be disadvantaged by not being able to purchase a more expensive device. And it really ate into my ability to attend meetings and do my work. And just a tiny little thing like that made me disadvantaged at my job. And I finally had to go in and buy a smartphone because everybody at the office, we had this big office building, they were switching their meetings all the time because they could. And their activities were filling to get the next space. I think as a whole, more cures can be made. There can be self-driving cars. I don't know what happens to truck drivers, but I think a lot of people will end up being in more automated janitorial work for these systems, cleaning up databases. We're going to have lots of things that get hacked, and so we're going to have people like attacking against people who attack entire grids of cars. What I would really like to see is early programming languages. Like a lot of our airplane system runs on COBOL and early language. You didn't have enough memory when computing started. You didn't have enough computing memory or computing processing power to make bloated code. Right now, it's not a big deal. If Twitter goes down, it's ha ha ha, oops, Twitter went down. What if that kind of code's in your pacemaker? What if that kind of code there's an example of the new Schrodinger's cat that I found recently on Twitter. There were all of these people that bought this automated pet feeding system for their cats. And they left town for like a week knowing that they could Skype their cats through this cat feeder and say hi to them and play with toys remotely from their phone and then feed them food. But it was on a central server. And when it failed, it didn't fail gracefully. It should fail to a timed system to still feed the cats, right? Now, all these people trusted that their cat would be fed when they were gone, and they checked in on their cat, so they didn't give somebody a key. So the system goes down, and for an indeterminate period of time, no one knows whether the cats are alive or dead. They don't know where their cats are. They don't know what their cats are doing. They can't see them. They don't know if their cats are being fed. And they don't know anyone nearby because they all live in condo land and don't know their neighbors. They can come over and take care of their cat. So this is an issue where it's stupid. Why would you get that kind of system? Because you trust in technology until it fails, right? Would I get that kind of system? No, I know better. I get a mechanical off-the-shelf system that doesn't have to connect to the internet to turn my lights on and off because it can't get hacked by somebody. But you have these people who get really excited and they have the disposable income and they think it's really cool, and then they end up getting trapped in those systems. It's funny if it's a cat. We can make all the Schrodinger's cats quotes we want, but if it's a human and your parent is stuck because you put them in an automated nursing home, I mean, what the heck, right? These are one of the things I don't want to have automated. I don't want nurses to be automated because if something happens, they can unplug the cord, they can put the insulin in, they can comfort somebody, they can talk to somebody. I think we're getting into a situation where we thought that individuality, especially after World War II, was so cool and that we could all live in houses, with a small family, but now we're atomizing. We're like more and more living alone. And instead of having grandparents with kids and parents, grandparents taking care of grandchildren, and a lot of people living in the same house, we have people living in like these pods. And everything's stretched out, and a lot of us are becoming economic refugees, where we're just going to the next place. And the only thing that's left to connect us in this like stretchy post-industrial world is the thing in our pockets, but it doesn't replace the human. And we have less and less reflection time where we go outside and look at the sunset. And it sucks.
That also makes me think of an anecdote on your idea of this inbuilt bias of anyone see I don't know if it was entirely true or if it was kind of condensed a little bit, but a car which recognized who sat in the driver's seat and then moved the seat to the positions. Oh, Ian, you like your seat here, and oh, it's Marguerite, you like your seat here. Well, when black people got into the car, it said no face noticed. Because there didn't happen to be any black engineers who worked on the image processing part of that car. So that was a big fail, and it was a really inbuilt bias. But how do you scrub those biases out? I think there's people looking at that, but it'll be really interesting to see what happens there. Yeah, question there.
What about machine learning? three. You have these predator drones flying around Syria and Iraq, assassinating people. Does a machine have a right to drop a bomb or a missile on somebody? What do you think of that?
That's a great question. I think it comes back to intent, which we oddly touched on about art. You know, like it's not art if you don't have intent. Is it murder if you don't have intent? And does that go back to the person who had the first intent? I don't know.
Yeah, I would say that it's bad. So the more degrees of separation that you have between yourself and someone else in an act of violence, the easier it is to do it. So anything that pushes that in that direction, that creates more degrees of separation, I would be against. Also, just to address an earlier question about what else should not be automated, I think it's probably hopeless, but I would really want sex to stay non-automated because it's one of the roots of people's developing empathy and maintaining it and having healthy relationships. So that's, as I said, I think it's pretty much a goner because as we speak, people are frantically trying to figure out how to make that experience simulated with machines.
They're doing a very good job at it.
Any other questions?
Actually, in response to your question about what should be done or not about these things, it's kind of when you kind of spray bullets at something, you're going to hit something that doesn't match that data set that you want to hit. And there's a book on it that I have, which is it was for the military, called Governing Lethality in Autonomous Machines. And it's just all these equations that people have written up. They're like, how can we minimize the loss of life and civilians and things like this? And it's just kind of one of these ridiculous books to have on your shelf. You know, it's just like, this is a thing. But there's a lot of issues because there are now all these remote drone pilots, and they're so far away. They still get PTSD because they go to work, they go into a container with no windows that can't be penetrated by stealth radar, and then they go and shoot a bunch of stuff, and then they come home to eat dinner with their family after killing a bunch of people, right? But they're not being deployed. It's kind of like an Ender's Game type situation, and Doug Rushkoff writes about that in the book Presence Shock. And then the real question is, if you just have an algorithm that detects things, you're going to get it wrong. There's going to be these edge cases, and we're treating a lot of this stuff mechanically and not organically. In an organic system, you get a cold, and you have all these antibodies, and they come and attack, and there's a giant war going on with all these microbes and things. You're not going to be able to ever eradicate everything in a system, but you can make catalytic forces that can do things. The big issue I have with all of this military stuff is that there are soft wars that can be fought that don't have to use a bunch of lethal power, that are way cheaper to fight by changing cultural things a little bit. I mean, it's more like anthropology. You can change this, or you can change this belief slightly, which is really manipulative, but it reduces the amount of death. And you've seen that a lot before in history, where somebody will come in and take over a country, and instead of allowing people to have that same religion or keeping the buildings but changing the religious symbols just slightly, they'll go in and it'll just be a complete mess, and they'll have to rebuild all the buildings. There's been a lot of stories about, and I don't advocate any of this, but somebody will come over and take something over, and they'll leave the infrastructure and merge and compromise, and it will be a lot easier. And that's not a solution to anything that's going on right now, but it's a lot better than just coming in and just destroying people willy-nilly, especially with algorithms and robots and things like that. And I don't have a lot of intelligent things to say about that. Sorry.
Yeah, just as a joke, but if I was the guy that was killing people just before lunch, I would like my job to be automated, I guess.
Yeah. Actually, there's an artwork that we are potentially looking at for a show where you it's a game where you play as a drone pilot, and you live a lot of the life where you have to go home and live your normal life after operating a drone. I can't remember the artist's name? Malay Industria. Yeah, it's very powerful, actually. We have another question. We have time for maybe one or two more questions here. Oh yeah, one up there.
My question's a lot sillier than the last two. So going off the bot or not bit at the end. I don't know if the panel is familiar with a short film called Sunspring from a few months back. Basically, these guys, I don't have a background in the area, so I'm only kind of guessing, but they used, I think, some version of a neural network to generate, using a lot of sci-fi scripts that were publicly available, as a seed to generate a 6-minute science fiction short film. I think they got one of the guys from Silicon Valley to star in it.
Yeah.
And like, there are parts where it's obviously, it contextually makes no sense. Like, I think the first line in it is, in a world of mass youth unemployment, young people will be forced to sell blood. That's something I could do. But other parts did kind of seem like the real thing. So I guess my convoluted question is, do the panel see any kind of growing application for machine learning or artificial intelligence, however you want to call it, in the generation of narrative art, and maybe in mainstream narrative art in the future?
Damien, why don't you?
Yeah, I think we all love this piece, and it raises a lot of very interesting questions. And so, first, I think the short film, for those who don't have seen it, it's a short film of maybe 7 minutes, something like that. And there is a real actor that play, and but all what they say has been written by the computer, and it makes no sense. So they act as much as they can, and they try to do something good out of the situation. But what they have to say is all is grammatically correct, and most sentence 1 by 1 or 2 by 2 make sense, but the whole thing makes no sense at all. And so to answer your question, I think it's in the future, not that far away, having some tools to help people to finalize the line of a dialogue, or to find the next line of a dialogue, some kind of tools that help you to write, it's completely doable, yeah.
It's kind of like in your phone. Have you seen where you can do predictive text, and it can often guess the next word? But have you ever played that game where you always tap the next word that it guesses, and you type a whole message to someone?
Yeah.
It comes out really strange.
Yeah.
It's like a Sunspring kind of script.
Yeah, and then you made a movie out of that, yeah.
Yeah, for a couple words, like the next couple words of dialogue, it makes sense, and then it just trails off, and people are like, "What is wrong with you?" So it's actually quite a fun game if you try it. If you have an iPhone, you just flick up on the keyboard, and it pops up. I think we have time for one last question, if anybody has one. Yeah.
Only question on this machine learning and artificial intelligence, and the fundamental aspect of AI or machine learning is whether it is what we need is perfection or imperfection. If we come to art, we appreciate more of, like, if there is an imperfection, it is done by a human being, and you tend to appreciate that. But everywhere, even if you talk about the drones, we're talking about we need to minimize losses, meaning you need to be more accurate. But the fundamental debate is where do we need accuracy and where do we need correctness versus where do we need imperfection, right? I don't think there's a debate on where we need to have a boundary line. This is where we need perfection. This is where we need accuracy. Can't find any literature or can't find any research on where do we need to study or have a boundary line. What's your opinion on that?
It's a great question. I think it came up during the curator meeting today, actually, because I can't tell you too much about one of the pieces, but it was kind of exploring what happens when an AI kind of apologizes for not getting things entirely correct and is quite aware of its limitations. And we were joking, saying, when Siri or whatever kind of verbal assistant you have doesn't work, it gets really frustrating because it's like, oh, I get it, you're asking for this, and you're like, no, I'm not asking for that. But if it was kind of apologetic and said, I think maybe you mean this, or I'm not so sure, or I'm kind of new at this, it might be more compelling, and admitting its kind of slight inaccuracy and not being perfect could kind of be okay and almost humanize it a little bit. I don't know, what do you guys think?
I think if I'm understanding right, that trying to get to where and why people expect either the perfect execution of the thing, or like appreciating flaws and variation and discovery. It's weird, and I think it could be just humans bring so many varied expectations to these things. When it comes to self-driving cars, people tend to unrealistically expect that they should have 0 accidents and cause 0 deaths. Whereas if they just were 50% better than humans, we probably should just take them, embrace them. Whereas with art, it's so much more varied, and this is like a form of entertainment and culture, and there's just so many infinite variations on that perfection is elusive. So you have to you have no other choice but to turn to appreciating difference.
Yeah, and also it's difficult to. So if you think about a drawing, drawing a circle, then you can we can imagine what perfection means. Perfection would be a perfect circle, and not perfection would be something a little round but not complete. But for a full painting, what perfection means. I mean, someone can claim that a painting done by Van Gogh is a perfection, but when he did it, everybody was saying, it's terrible, the blue, have you seen the yellow? He didn't even finish the painting. You can see the fabric. So it's difficult to define perfection and perfection. So that's answering the question a little more difficult. And about machine learning, you can train a system to draw circles that are not perfect, that looks like human. If you give to the system enough circles that are not completely circles, then it will be able to draw circles that looks like humans draw a circle, and up to the point that we were not able to make the distinction between a circle drawn by a human and drawn by the computer.
I think that's a great way to conclude it, because it brings us all the way back to, I think it was Rembrandt who has that sketch that has a circle in the middle of it, where he was basically bragging about he could draw a perfect circle freehand, which I suppose if you went in with a microscope, it's probably not perfect, but it's really good, nearly as good as the machine. So I think we should leave it there. So listen, thank you so much to everybody for joining us for tonight. But let's give a big round of applause for our curators, but also these are 3 of our 4 curators, I should say. Lynn Scarf, who couldn't join us, is the 4th curator. So let's give them a big, warm round of applause. And thank you, everybody, for coming tonight and for joining the discussion. If you want to chat a bit more, we'll stick around for a little bit. So thank you very much.